Thank you. As Bobby said, this is a cent-free convention. And that's why we didn't invite Donald Trump, because his politics stink. I'm a little wound up this morning. Been up since 3:15 as we flew from Washington, D.C. to Winnipeg. I spent the last 5 days with our team in Washington as we kick off and we start the renegotiations of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And I've been watching for 5 days the politics that's coming out of the White House, the foolishness, the hate. And I'm telling you, have no idea how happy I am to be here in Winnipeg, because brothers and sisters, there's no place like home. Well, good morning, sisters and brothers. Welcome to your Canadian Council. Bonjour, conchères et confrères. Bienvenue in Winnipeg.
Welcome, brothers and sisters. Welcome to Winnipeg. Welcome to the Canadian Council.
I am so thrilled to be here in Winnipeg, in Treaty 1 territory, home of the Anishinaabe and heart of the Métis Nation. And what better way to kick off council than with a tribute to the great Bob White? A leader, a visionary, and a friend to so many in this room. Bob embodied the spirit of solidarity amongst workers here at home and around the world. In Bob's eyes, borders didn't define nations. Nations were formed through common struggle and the self-determination of people. As a kid, I would spend time in Port Elgin with my mother and my father. When my father was local union president and worked for the staff of the union. In my eyes, Bob wasn't the Canadian director of the United Auto Workers. He wasn't the historic labor leader we celebrate today. He was Bob. He was family. He was my hero. And boy, do I miss him. Bob was instrumental in leading union solidarity work to end the apartheid region in South Africa. It's another part of the rich legacy he left us. Not many in this room knew that. He traveled to South Africa to meet with Nelson Mandela. He watched the formation of the African National Congress. He worked with the Congress of South African Trade Unions, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, and the overall labor movement. He saw a nation struggle with its own reconciliation. I think it is so fitting that we honor Bob this weekend with our Nelson Mandela Award for Human Rights. It's a fitting tribute to a great man. Bob will forever have a place in our hearts and in Canadian labor history. Look, I've known Bob since I was a kid. I still frequently behave that way, as I'm told frequently. But Bob was an incredible leader. He had more courage, more guts than anybody I've ever met. It was Bob's vision is why we're all here today. Bob had a dream, and his dream was of a large Canadian union with power, not just at the bargaining table, but power politically. A union of thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of people that could shape the politics of the country. Bob never took anybody's crap. And when the American Union decided, our predecessor, my predecessor within the UAW, decided that the Canadians ought not to have a sovereign voice, Bob led the breakaway. Because Bob never believed that workers were mere shadows owned by unions, that workers had the right to self-determination. So here we are today, 87 different unions together in this room that now has formed Unifor. So Bob, this was your vision. It's our collective duties to fulfill your mandate. We love you, brother, and we miss you. Rest in peace. Winnipeg. It was in this place that our labor movement came of age. In the general strike of 1919, workers banded together. Didn't matter their skill or which trade group they belonged to, their gender, race, or sector. They struck for basic rights and freedoms, for better working conditions and greater equality for all people. This is the place that first extended Canadian women the right to vote, paving the way for suffrage movements across the country in the years to come. I love Winnipeg because it's a proud city. It's a union city. It's a city shaped by its challenges, but defined by its fighting spirit and its resilience. What a wonderful place for us to come together. The leadership, the activists of our great union, to build deeper bonds of solidarity with each other, to chart an ambitious path for activism over the next 12 months, to learn from one another, and to be inspired by one another. I'll tell you, the work you folks put in and day out to build this great union, that's what really inspires me the most. It's hard to believe sometimes that Unifor is not yet 4 years old. In such a short time, we've accomplished so much. My schedule, it's a bit messy. I don't know how else to put it. I often wake up forgetting which city or town I'm in. I don't get a lot of time in the day to sit down and reflect. And I know it's the same for all of you. And that's not good. Because our victories are the fuel that drives us forward. Our union has been the antidote to the cynical conservative politics that hurt Canada for over a decade. We've brought a jolt of energy into a labor movement that at times has been lifeless. And we're making deep connections with community partners. We're making unions relevant again, and that feels good. That's a celebratory year for Canada. A year of many milestones. Canada, the Federation, celebrates its 150th year. The city of Montreal just turned 375. Even our Stanley Cup just turned 125. Although it hasn't been here in Canada for, I think, at least 25 years. I won't even talk about my beloved Toronto Maple Leafs. Got a Red Wing fan behind me. There's always a lot of civic pride on these big birthdays. But there's also a lot more than lies beneath the fireworks and festivities. A lot that requires us to reflect deeply on our values. It was 25 years ago that more than 24 workers died in Nova Scotia's Westray coal mine. Workers placed in an underground death trap, a tinderbox waiting to explode. 25 years and not one prosecution has been laid on a company executive. It's been just over 100 years that women have claimed the right to vote. And yet today, a century later, we still have a parliament that underrepresents women. We still have women leaders facing sexist attacks and harassment. Earlier this year, we co-sponsored a wonderful initiative. It's called the Daughters of the Vote to commemorate this anniversary. Each federal riding seat in Parliament was taken up by a young woman. They were beyond powerful, let me tell you. Talking about equality, talking about empowerment. Federally, we can celebrate the fact that 88 MPs elected in 2015 were women. It's a record. But that represents just 1/4 of the House. Sisters and brothers, that's not good enough. And we're not going to wait another 100 years to make this right. It may be 150 years of Canadian Confederation, but there is an infinity. There's an infinitely longer history, a truer history of this land. It is people that we simply cannot ignore. Deep and lasting scars mark the history of Canada for Indigenous people. It's a history of half promises and exploitation, of oppression and injustice, and one in desperate need of reconciliation. This process has started. Although there's a long path forward, Indigenous people will lead the way, including our own Unifor members. We will all stand together in solidarity. Earlier this year, we were approached to be a presenting sponsor of the North American Indigenous Games. A celebration of Indigenous culture and sport that attracted thousands of athletes from across the continent. The organizers understood Unifor's social values, our work with Indigenous communities, and that our objectives were aligned. Truth is, they needed help. Not just money, but people on the ground, support. And we didn't hesitate. In just days, we rounded up hundreds of Unifor volunteers. So many, some had to be turned away. The organizers couldn't believe it, didn't think it was possible. We know that when we commit to something, when we believe in something, we make it happen. Now, I know it'll take a lot more than a sporting event to realize reconciliation, but it is certainly part of the journey. And let me tell you, being there, standing beside Unifor activists, standing with these incredible athletes and Indigenous leaders, participating in the medal ceremonies, being a part of this community of people was a very proud moment for me and our union. So let's take the time this year to celebrate. Let's celebrate the good, but let's not ignore the bad. Let's celebrate the resistors, the revolutionaries, those who challenge inequality and injustice. Let's celebrate those who wake up every day and choose to build an inclusive society, not those who want to tear it down. Let's celebrate this year by building the world we want and need. The theme of our council this weekend is solidarity for a better world. Let's focus on this for a minute, because that's a powerful theme and a powerful message. A few weeks back, I came across the story of a retired Unifor member, Paul Edwards. He's a health and safety activist. He was the former local president, Windsor, out of Local 1973. Paul was put in contact with an unorganized worker at a small auto parts plant at work, and who didn't know where to turn. This was back in 2010. This worker, a newcomer to Canada, endured years of harassment by her employer following her injury. WSIB case manager said her injury stemmed from a pre-existing condition. She was denied her benefits, and her employer eventually terminated her in 2012. And this time, Paul was already retired from his job. He watched his own workplace close, and with it his local union. But he was relentless. He had no obligation to take on this file, least of all stick with it. But you know, he never gave up. He was determined to seek justice for this injured worker. On July 4th of this year, 7 years after this all started, a decision of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Tribunal vice chair ruled in the workers' favor, finding that pre-existing conditions cannot stop the receipt of benefits in this case. Paul was over the moon. This worker, who never paid a penny in union dues to Unifor, is now receiving 5 years' worth of back pay and is being referred for services to assist in her workplace transition. What an incredible outcome. What an amazing story. After all he did, Paul felt compelled to thank our union. He thanked us. He thanked us for entrusting him with this task. He thanked us for our education programs. On workers' compensation, he thanked the DLs he met at Port Elgin. He thanked his local union mentors. This is solidarity. This is the stuff that Unifor is made of. I couldn't be prouder. On behalf of all Unifor members, I want to thank you, Paul. I want to thank you for your determination. Let me tell you, Paul's story shows that solidarity isn't about cheering on those in need. It's about standing with them, working with them, shoulder to shoulder. It's about getting involved when it matters and when times get tough. And boy, things have been tough. In the Atlantic, ice storms gripped New Brunswick this year, following major flood events in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland months earlier. In Quebec, more recently, massive flooding impacted 170 local communities, displacing thousands of people. And in BC, we've seen severe wildfires ravage the province's interior. It brings back painful images of Alberta's wildfires that ravaged Fort McMurray last year. There are so many other examples too, and there will be more. Climate change poses a real threat to our planet, and dealing with extreme weather, unfortunately, is a new reality for us. But when disaster strikes, Unifor steps up. That's what we do. Whether it's our members, our neighbors, or our friends, we step up. This past year, we've secured nearly $1 million in funds for disaster relief efforts in Canada through our Social Justice Fund, our national office, our regional and Quebec councils, and through member donations. More than that, our members take action, offering shelter, food, support. This year, sisters in the United States also took action, taking a bold stand against a sexist, misogynist, and racist president, leading a historic march on Washington, and Unifor stood with them. Our members joined in solidarity events in 30 cities across Canada. Women and men coming together in solidarity, calling for employment equity, for reproductive rights, to eliminate sexual harassment and win gender justice. Women and men united in resisting sexism, resisting Trump. It was a powerful moment, and I was proud to be a part of it. There are so many other acts of solidarity, too. Unifor has been a lead voice in the fight to save local journalism in Canada, a critical issue. We've been at the forefront, pushing the federal government to take action to support a news media industry that is breaking apart and bleeding cash, ensuring Canadians don't lose a vital link to their democracy. Our unit has also been working hard to ensure a future for more than 600 forest-dependent communities as the U.S. continues to attack our softwood lumber industry. We held rallies in St. John and in Thunder Bay, bringing thousands together to raise awareness of the impact of this dispute. We'll have not only just on Unifor members, but all people. Our members are working tirelessly in defense of public health care and for advocating for universal child care and pharmacare that benefits everyone. This is how solidarity works. Your fight is our fight. Our fight is your fight. I've always said that our union would be defined by its actions. It's what we do, not what we say, that sets us apart from the pack. We live the spirit of solidarity, and that's what builds a strong union, and that's what fuels a movement. I want to be clear about one thing, too. Solidarity might build a strong union, but our equity work is what builds a relevant union. You'll notice in the agenda that we've made equity a focal point of this Canadian Council. I'm also proud of the fact that equity work is becoming more central to our everyday work as a union. Our commitment was to build a new union that was more inclusive, a union for everyone. That's a slogan, I get it, but it's also a vision. It's a benchmark, it's an ambition. We set a commitment to be more responsive to our members' needs, to locate and tear down barriers, to listen and be adaptable. I think we've come a long way so far, and I'm glad. But do we have a long way to go? No doubt. To be a union that's more representative and reflective of its members and of working people, we had to do an internal deep dive. We had to get a better handle on who we are so that we can know who we are succeeding and where we need to do more work. So we undertook a study, an initiative we refer to as an equity audit. And later this morning, you'll hear a presentation on the work done so far and the work that lies ahead. I'm tabling a recommendation to this council that this work continue and that it leads to concrete recommendations on how we do better as a union. We focus on equity because it's about fairness and it's about justice. That's what unions were built to tackle in bargaining and in politics. That's what Unifor was built to tackle. I believe we can never have true equality without economic justice, sisters and brothers. And right now, Canada is lacking big time. All we have to do is look around to see the economic injustices that persist in this country. Canadian women still earn 72 cents on the dollar as compared to men. A gender pay gap that's actually widened since 2009. Most women have no access to paid leave when suffering from domestic violence, a matter our union is working hard to fix in bargaining and through legislation. Unemployment is higher for workers of color than non-racialized workers in Canada. 1 in every 4 black women lives below the poverty line. Indigenous employment levels fall well behind the Canadian average, and it's worse for Inuit people. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered adults raising children are 3 times more likely to earn incomes at or below the poverty level than single straight adults. 1 in 3 post-secondary school graduates move straight into low-wage, precarious work when they graduate, alongside massive piles of student debt. I could go on, and I can go on, and I can go on, and this could go on, but it's got to stop. Inequality is a symptom of a broken economy and a fractured society. In bargaining, we have a powerful tool to address inequality. Every pay equity fight we win. Every woman's advocate we train, and we have more than 350 across the country. And just recently negotiated at Sobeys in Kincardine, the Fairmont Hotel in Vancouver, the Sheridan Centre in Montreal. Every innovative hiring program we set up that creates opportunities, like our partnership in the shipyards with Women Unlimited in Nova Scotia, which brings women welders to work in the Halifax shipyard. Every time we challenge two-tiering like we are doing in Full Gear in Quebec, or challenge restaurant owners to scrap sexist dress codes for servers. Every time we say no to unfair student wages, when we stand up and defend our public services and Crown agencies like our Western Region team is doing in Saskatchewan. Every time we do this, we advance the equity work of our union. Because equity work is a social justice work. It's also political work. Demanding equity in our workplaces, our communities, is a political act. An act to build a better world. Inequality is a product of our past. It's about power. It's about politics. It's about understanding the choices that we're making. And we're making better choices moving forward. Let me give you an example. I'm not a fan of the Pallister government here in Manitoba. And that is an understatement of the day. I think I once referred to him publicly as a bully. He didn't like that, and frankly, I really don't care, because he is. One of his first acts as premier was to kill card check certification. By making it harder to unionize, the premier made it more difficult for vulnerable workers to get ahead. That includes women. That includes workers of color. Employers already have 3 aces up their sleeve, and Pallister deals them out a full house. Let's be frank. Brian Pallister isn't exactly one for good judgment. This is the guy who thinks he can run the province of Manitoba for 2 months without receiving emails while he's on vacation in Costa Rica. And if the card check decision wasn't bad enough, he's He's also decided to hide in the shadows of a growing debt for women's shelters. Now, this really gets under my skin. Apparently, putting the right amount of public money into services that support women fleeing violence and abuse doesn't yield enough value for money for this premier. Shelters are laying off workers. Women are not getting the support they need. A similar crisis is unfolding in Quebec. There are news stories surfacing of immigrant women, indigenous women, being turned away at the doors. Frankly, I don't think it's fair that Mr. Palliser gets to hightail it out of town for 2 months to vacation in Costa Rica. Not when millions of hard-working people in this country have to slug it out, most of who can't afford a trip to Costa Rica as it is. And frankly, I think it's ludicrous that the Premier of Manitoba has turned his back on women and has turned his back on the province's women's shelters. So we're going to hold a special event tomorrow night. We're calling it Party Like the Premier in Costa Rica. And we're going to hold a raffle. And the winner's going to get 2 all-expense-paid tickets to Costa Rica. So you know what it's like to work as a Manitoba premier. And I want to make sure that the premier doesn't feel homesick while he's away. And of course, we're going to make sure this is a working vacation, just like he's promised. We're going to send him a message too. We're going to let him know that while he's turned his back on Manitoba's women's shelters, Unifor hasn't. And we're going to donate all of the proceeds from our Costa Rica raffle to the women's shelters the Palliser government refuses to support. These are choices, political choices that are being made, sisters and brothers. That's why politics is vital to the work we do. It's part of our DNA. Since we formed, nearly 1,200 of our rank and file members, leaders, and staff have lobbied politicians and government officials. It's incredible, the type of influence that working people can have. We're building political activists all across the country. We are empowering our members. We are demystifying politics and making a difference. This year alone, Unifor members in media, forestry, healthcare, and others have traveled to Ottawa, spending days and weeks talking to government officials, talking to politicians, putting our issues on the federal agenda. Thousands of our members volunteer their time, work the phones, knock on doors, flood the streets during election campaigns, doing the work we need to build a better, more progressive country. When I think of what we've accomplished as a union, I'm amazed and I'm inspired. Let's review the checklist of right-wing leaders we've turfed from office. Stephen Harper, check. Tim Hudak, check. Christy Clark, check. Brad Wall, here's a new one, check. Federally, we've made big strides. We've pushed the Trudeau government to dismantle some of the legislative traps that the Conservatives tried to set for working people. Bill C-35 and Bill 525, gone. Legislation that was designed to harm unions are dead. Just as important, progressive ideas are taking hold again. There's a turning of the page on the dark Harper years. Bill C-16, which updated the human rights and criminal codes to protect gender expression and gender identity, was a huge victory. For the first time in a very long time in Ottawa, unions have access to political decision makers. We're in the room and at the table. Under Harper, we were outcast, ignored. And I'm telling you, we're taking full advantage of this opportunity. Our role in electoral politics is crucial. It creates opportunities to advance progressive ideas and directly support working people. Low-wage workers in Alberta and Ontario are set to become the first two provinces ever to establish a $15 minimum wage. This was a pipe dream not just 5 years ago. Let me tell you a story, and it always motivated me. It's stuck in my craw because it's kind of the mindset that we're dealing with. I have a neighbor. She's in her mid-70s. Her name is Marie Benton. The fact that she's still working in her mid-70s is a subject for another day. But I was having one heck of a debate with her because people were out on the streets, McDonald's workers, Harvey workers, other fast food restaurants. The workers were on the streets in the United States demonstrating, fighting for $15 an hour. And she said, I don't think they deserve $15 an hour, and did that ever get my attention? I said, how can you say that? You're dealing with some of the largest, richest multinational employers in the world. They can afford to pay more than $15 an hour. Why would you say that? She says, well, I work in an accountant's office. I'm highly skilled, and I'm only making $17 an hour. And if I'm only making $17 an hour, they shouldn't make $15 an hour. And I said, Marie, my friend, the issue is not about them making $15 an hour. The problem is that you only damn well make $17 an hour. Join a union. Let's take care of those wages. The $15 minimum wage momentum is on top of other historic labor law changes. Changes that set a higher standard for other provinces and territories to follow. I see the opportunity we've now created for ourselves in British Columbia to take the next step on minimum wage and other issues. The coalition formed between the NDP and Greens, led by John Horgan, is a breath of fresh air. It's a moment that came to pass because we worked hard for it. We put the boots on the ground to make it happen. We strategized. We campaigned smartly, and we won. We won the closest provincial election in BC in 114 years. So today we're not talking about legislation that orders workers back to work like we did under Christy Clark, and of course we fought against it. Today we're talking about a $10 a day childcare instead of tax cuts for the rich. We sent another signal that attacking working people, underestimating the power of Unifor members, underestimating our ability to mobilize is a losing proposition. I think of the elections in Nova Scotia this year too. I think of Stephen McNeil. I call him Stevie. He doesn't like it. I don't like him anyway, so I don't give a damn what he thinks about me personally. And his right-wing so-called liberal government. A government that's gone out of its way to make life hard for workers. The Premier has managed to piss off nearly every single worker in Nova Scotia. In just about 3 years, he tabled seven pieces of anti-union legislation, some of which are unconstitutional. He's about as zoned out as Premier Pallister out there in Costa Rica. But he tangled with Unifor. That's trouble. He tangled with healthcare workers, and that's big trouble. Our members came out and forced this past election about as organized, as engaged, and as committed as ever. They sent Mr. McNeil a clear message. He was reelected by the slimmest possible majority, 130 votes. 130 votes. Since the election and in the wake of the election, he started to sing a bit of a different tune on major issues, like health care. That's a result of us. That's a result of the activism of our members. And that makes me so proud. I ran into McNeil in Edmonton at the Premier's conference. I'm going to tell a story. I ran into him. And he looked at me and he says, "I've got a majority government." I said, "By 130 votes. He says, "I've got a majority government." I said, "By 130 votes. I said, "What did you think? 7 pieces of anti-labor legislation. You really think that we're going to let you poke our members and we're not going to poke you back?" He says, "If you think I was bad the last 4 years, wait till you see what happens over the next 4. I said, "Enjoy your last term." And let me tell you, if he passes 1 piece of anti-labor legislation over the next 4 years, we'll be on the streets, and we're going to make sure we take him out. Sisters and brothers, politics is as much about vote and seat counts as it is about activating our members. It's about transforming union members into community leaders. And it's about giving them the confidence to know that together we can change our world for the better. We've got a big year ahead of us in 2018, and we need to be ready. Provincial elections in Quebec, New Brunswick, Ontario will be front and center for us. Municipal elections in parts of the country are happening too, and they are just as important. And then there's the big fish. There is the Saskatchewan Party, the party of Brad Wall, the premier of privatization who recently announced his resignation, which is a shame, because I would have loved to have seen the look on his face when we bounced the Saskatchewan Party from power and all of their backward, right-wing, anti-worker policies. You know, it's only poetic justice that Brad Wall is announcing his resignation. At the same time, he announced that there were 6 massive billboards in Regina, Moose Jaw, and Saskatchewan that say, "Brad Wall is a liar." The signs, of course, sponsored by Unifor, the signs were about a selling off of the Crown corporations. I'm proud that we literally saw the writing on the wall, or the billboard, in this matter. I'm so proud of the work of our activists leading the Stand Up for Your Crowns campaign. Great work, sisters and brothers. And then there's Brian Pallister, the biggest fish of them all. If he's back from Costa Rica in time, we're coming at them in full force. And of course, it's not too early to start setting our sights on the 2019 federal election. That election will be up against the new Tory leader, Andrew Scheer. A bit of a surprise pick, but certainly cut from Harper's cloth. The story, I'm fascinated. The Tories think they have a messaging problem, so they've doubled down on a leader who is young and smiles a lot, but has backwards views on marriage and abortion. The fact is the Tories have a policy problem, not a message problem. We can't afford to go backwards anymore. We can't afford to feed those marginal political voices, the voices of sexists, racists, bigots. We're not giving these warped social views any oxygen. We're going to push hard against conservatives and even harder on the Trudeau government. We're watching the NDP leadership election closely, and we hope that whoever comes out successful in the end shares our ambitions and our agenda for a stronger, fairer, more equitable Canada. Let me tell you, sisters and brothers, through our political work, we're going to build the kind of country we want. We're going to build a national child care program. We're going to win a national pharmacare program. Everyone will have access to the prescription drugs they need. More than ever before, a moment we can't waste. Coming out of this council, I want to lead an aggressive campaign to make this happen. Once and for all, we're going to build a proper trade agenda, one that works for workers and communities, not corporations. We're going to elect more progressive MPs across this country than ever before. And we're going to continue building this incredible energy, this incredible union. I'll tell you something else. There are acts of solidarity everywhere. But collective bargaining and organizing are a critical part of solidarity. They help us to build a better world. When workers have access to collective agreements, there's less income inequality. Our economies are more productive. Workers are healthier. Yet in OECD countries, union coverage continues to decline, dropping from 45% in 1985 to 33% today. Joining a union is one of the most effective tools to win economic justice. But it's not only out of reach for so many workers, it's a right that's denied by many governments. That's a trend we have to reverse. And that's why I'm so proud of the work we are doing as Unifor. While labor unions the world over are shrinking, Unifor is growing. We're a beacon, sisters and brothers, a sign of hope that there is a future for unions in this country and over the world. When we started Unifor, we were a union of 300,000. Today, we're a union of 315,000 and growing. This past year alone, we've welcomed nearly 3,000 new members into the Unifor family. School bus drivers and supermarket workers, hotel workers, healthcare workers, media workers. We strive to be a union for everyone, and that's what makes us so strong. Prior to this council, we hosted a second organizing forum, of which many of you attended. In it, we talked about the good work of Unifor members and our local unions who were out there organizing, finding new ways to reach out to workers. We saw how engaged and well-prepared our members are for organizing. They're doing incredible work growing our union, growing this movement. Look, this isn't just the job of our organizing staff. This is our collective responsibility, each and every one of us. Member organizers, activists, bargaining committee members, local union executive board members. We have to keep on this work. All of our work must be done through a lens of organizing, including our collective bargaining. This past year, we bargained some significant agreements. Our Bellcraft union, nearly 4,000 members. We pushed Bell to the brink, bargaining to a deadline, something they've not been used to. After resisting, the company agreed to new work jurisdiction language that provides job security to members, something we've long fought for. We won this along pay increases and contributions to our paid education leave program, which is a first. At Pratt & Whitney in Longueuil, Local 510, nearly 2,500 members. We negotiated a commitment to ensure early retirement transitions, securing jobs for hundreds of young people in the coming years, in addition to major wage increases and benefit gains. In the Western region, pulp and paper, we worked alongside our friends with the PPWC to get a strong deal with Canfor that includes wage increases, a skilled trades adjustment, benefit improvements, and paid education leave, another first. The importance of this is this deal sets the pattern for 6,000 other pulp and paper workers in Western Canada. An incredible achievement. We've led the way in other pattern bargaining in the energy sector as well. Our landmark deal done at Suncor last year set the pattern for other agreements, including at Imperial oil facilities in Strathcona and in Nanticoke, as well as at the Co-op refinery in Regina. It didn't stop the employer from resisting us and pushing back on wage increases and job security language, but we pushed right to the brink and got the deals done. This year, we've settled new cross-Canada contracts in the courier industry at DHL and Loomis, more than 1,000 members. These are strong agreements that continue to build on a national framework for thousands of members in the courier industry. And earlier this year, news came down in Oshawa that 500, I'm so proud of this, 500 new jobs would be created in General Motors. The same factory that was slated to close, the same factory that industry watchers said couldn't be saved. Today, that factory is the only in North America capable of building both cars and trucks. That's all because of what we've accomplished at the bargaining table. Congratulations, Local 222, you make us so proud. Think of our last set of auto bargaining. We secured new major investments in auto plants, all of them, as well as new products for those who needed it the most. More than $1.5 billion worth of investments across Ford, GM, and Fiat Chrysler that secures our auto footprints and secures jobs. We've settled other major contracts too, at Bombardier and Thunder Bay, at Rio Tinto and Kitimat, and at NAV Canada, all together representing nearly 4,000 Unifor members. We build a union through bargaining, but we also enable ourselves to build stronger communities here at home and around the world. Our Social Justice Fund, our Canadian Community Fund are so critical to this work. Two funds that exist because of our bargaining, because we see our role as a union extended beyond the workplace. Right now, Unifor is helping to bring medical aid to Congolese women who are victims of rape and violence in partnership with Health Partners International Canada. We're working with Oxfam in South Sudan and the Canadian Red Cross in Ethiopia to bring emergency relief, food and clean water to sisters and brothers who are facing catastrophic famine and starvation. We're working together with Canadian journalists for free expression to promote press freedom around the globe, including support for the critical work of journalists in places like China, Turkey, Egypt, Syria. Later this weekend, you'll hear about some of the work we've contributed to in Shoal Lake, Manitoba, bringing fresh water to a community that has been under a water advisory for 2 decades. Every time we bargain, we get another chance to build the world we want. We're bargaining all the time, around the clock. Right now, we've got our eyes on other major rounds of bargaining across the country, too. And there are a lot. We're heading into healthcare bargaining across Ontario, shipyard bargaining in Halifax, casino bargaining at Edgewater in Vancouver at the Great Blue Heron, the Bell Clerical units in Ontario and Quebec, Bell Lion in the Atlantic, GM in Ingersoll, our Montreal area car dealerships, Brinks. We've got our eyes on these and more. Each of them an opportunity to further our bargaining program. Each an opportunity to build a union. We've also got our eyes on key dispute and are working hard to find resolutions. Later this weekend, we'll hear from our striking and locked out workers, including our sisters and brothers at DJ Composites in Newfoundland and Delastic in Quebec. Difficult disputes that have tarried on for far too long and are in need of immediate resolution. I want to acknowledge the incredible work of our local 112 members working for North Star Aerospace out in Milton, Ontario, my hometown. I want to thank them for their activism and bravery in staging a 48-hour plant occupation of the workplace. North Star has made plans to close its facilities, cutting 200 jobs. They're moving work to Chicago. They wanted to move without putting the needed money into the pension plan, leaving it 24% underfunded. And the underfunding would affect the pensions of both current and future retirees. They thought that they could get away with it. They thought they can get away with it without a fight, but boy, were they wrong. We will continue to press this company. That takeover was a signal that we won't take kindly to corporate greed. In fact, it's a signal to all employers in Canada that our union doesn't get pushed around, that we'll do what's necessary to protect our jobs, our pensions, and our communities, that we'll stand up for ourselves every time. I'm proud of the leadership of Local 112. I'm so proud of all the activists, the staff, the community partners who held the line right around the clock. That takes guts. That takes commitment. That takes sacrifice. This is the stuff that Unifor is made of. Let me tell you a couple stories about that 48-hour occupation. And it really goes to show you that everything we do leaves impressions. When I showed up to the picket line, we had our 250 activists standing there holding strong, while we had 20 leaders in the plant. We're on one side of the street, and the police and the bosses were on the other side of the street. When I showed up, the police came across the street, and one of the plant managers, police officer, walks up to him and he goes, "Morning, Jerry." And I'm going, Jesus, why would he know my name? And I go, "Good morning." So I said, "Who are you?" to the other person. He says, my name is so-and-so, I'm the plant manager. So the police constable said to me, Jerry, how long are you going to be here? So I'm going to be here until somebody writes us a check for $6 million. The guy says, that's out of my price range. I says, well, then you're useless. Get out of here. The police officer said, Jerry, how long are you going to be here? I said, what part of I need $6 million don't you understand? So the company person said to the police officer, he says, he's obviously not listening. They're obviously breaking the rules. They're obviously breaking the law. What are you going to do about it? The police officer looked at him right in the face and he said, I'm not going to do a damn thing. The police officer, the corporate person then walked away, and the whole time that I'm speaking to this police officer, I'm thinking to myself, where in the heck do I know this guy from? He says to me after the company spokesperson walked away, he says, okay, Jerry, are you going to do your Hope and High Heels walk again this year? I said, you're damn right I am. He says, where are you going to be? Milton and Burlington. I said, I'm out of country when it's in Milton, so I'm doing it in Burlington. He says, I'll see you there. This police officer has walked with us for the last 4 years in a row as we walk to help eliminate violence against women. But the real touching story is the story that has been told me by my incredible assistant, Shane Wark, that played an incredible role, a real leadership role. I'm so proud of you, my friend, in the occupation that day. As the occupation came to an end after the courts interfered, we had a lot of our activists in the pouring rain standing outside fighting. And as that portion of the fight, because I'm telling you, it's not over. It's not over with North Star. You trust me as I'm standing here today. One of the retirees that had been retired for many years said to the group that was there, crying, he said, listen, I'm going to take a 24% reduction on my pension, but that's not the issue that is most important as I stand here today. He said, in all the years that I've been a member of the union, I have never been so proud as I am at this minute because of what the union has done for me. Brother, you need to understand it's not what we have done for you, but it's what you have done for us. Thank you very much for your courage. I want to congratulate Scott and Graham that did one hell of a job leading the fight. Right now, in many workplaces, we're being put to the test in other ways. We're on the cusp of a major revolution in new technology, automation and artificial intelligence. We have to better understand the implications and develop the right strategies. We have to be at the forefront of our changing workplaces. I have a recommendation to Council this weekend that calls for us to host a conference on new technology, to deepen our analysis and to respond in a way that protects our interests of our members and the public. New technology isn't the only threat workers face. Corporate-led free trade deals continue to hang over our heads. Just last month, more than 600 jobs were cut just a few weeks ago at GM's auto assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario. Why? Because production of the new model GMC Terrain, a car that was exclusively built here in Canada, is being shifted to Mexico. Each year, hundreds of thousands of Terrains are sold between Canada and the United States, and virtually nothing, zero, are sold in Mexico. Thanks to free trade, deals like NAFTA, GM is free to do whatever the heck they want. They're free to take advantage of Mexican workers earning less than $4 an hour in wages and benefits. They're free to set up shop in countries where unions are run by governments, where laws aren't enforced, where activists are jailed or even kidnapped. They're free to threaten us at the bargaining table, to close our plants. They can lay off 600 Canadians, set up shop in Mexico, and sell back as many trains as they want, free of consequence. Free trade agreements have been a gift to corporations like General Motors, and they've been a thorn in our side for nearly 30 years. I can use GM as an example only because it's fresh in my mind. I look around at other workplaces. At Locomotive Diesel in London, Ontario. Company relocates to Indiana to take advantage of new right-to-work laws that cripple unions. 400 Canadian jobs lost, no penalty. Navistar in Chatham, a world-class truck facilities. Company relocates production to the low-wage U.S. South in Mexico, killing a plant that used to employ thousands of Canadians. Then adding salt to the wound, tries to get out of its severance and pension obligations. A decade-long court battle that we've waged against a company that only recently we have won. And what a victory it was. After 9 years of heartache, of putting our members at Locals 127 and 35 through the ringer, the courts have ruled that Navistar owes Unifor members upwards of $35 million in reclaimed severance and pension. Money and justice we would never have seen if we didn't take on the fight. I want to take a moment to recognize a few of the people who led that fight. My mentor, Bob Chernicki. Please stand. Louis Gottile, Jeff Wareham, Kathy Baker, Doug Wright, Nicole Granger, and Jim Mitchell. I know you're all in the room. Please stand and be acknowledged for your incredible work. Make no mistake, under NAFTA there is no penalty for what Navistar has done. Free trade hasn't worked, and it's not just for Canadian workers, but all workers. In the US, millions of jobs have been lost as corporations have shifted production offshore. In Mexico, more workers live today in poverty than before NAFTA was signed. Around the world, investment flows to developing economies have not helped workers who are suffering, but because workers are suffering. I'm grateful that today, for the first time in a generation, the world is taking fresh eyes to the question of free trade. Trump has taken a lot of credit for this because he campaigned on trade. He helped change the political channel on trade. But let's be clear, we're the ones who built the criticism. We're the ones, the trade union movement, that crafted the analysis. We're the ones who flagged at every turn how bad these deals have been. In a lot of ways, Trump wrote our coattails. Not because he's a friend of labor or a working class guy, but because he's an opportunist. And because mainstream political parties have consistently refused to listen. Trump might have talked the talk on trade during his campaign. He might have walked away from the hated TPP deal, but now he's laid out his priorities for renegotiating NAFTA, and guess what? It's NAFTA wrapped in the TPP's clothing. The free trade Republicans in the Congress hated Trump for criticizing the deals. Now they're right on side with the president. That signals to me that Trump's NAFTA is more of the same, and workers don't buy it. In his first months in office, Trump taken aim at Canadian industries like steel, aluminum, aerospace, dairy. He's catering to the special interest lobbies in the United States. He slapped tariffs at our softwood lumber exports. And he's dragging out a dispute that should be over and done with. A deal is in place, but the U.S. lumber lobby wants more. Our job today isn't to worry about what Trump will do. It's to take advantage of the opportunity that's being presented. We have to be aggressive. We have to put the pressure on him. Federal officials think I'm nuts. They say, let's renegotiate NAFTA. Let's think big. Look, NAFTA doesn't need a twist or a tweak. It needs to be totally rebuilt. We need a deal that's designed to help workers, not harm them. And if that's this new NAFTA, and if the new NAFTA deal doesn't cut it, well, then we should damn well walk away from it. I want to let the delegates know here today how influential Unifor's voice has been on trade these past years. Our activism during the last federal election made the TPP politically toxic for opposition parties. Our warnings about the Canada-Korea deal have all come true. Our calls for a new progressive model to trade are being picked up in government message tracks. We've been such an influential voice that the government wants our counsel at the table in NAFTA talks. I've been asked to help advise Canada's negotiating team, and I've been meeting with the lead negotiator, Steve Verheuvel, over the past several months and nonstop over the last few days, including late last night. I spoke to him again this morning. Look, I said to them, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to participate. We're happy to participate. If it means helping win a better deal. In fact, before coming to Winnipeg this morning, I spent the last few days in Washington as part of the launch of the formal NAFTA talks. I'm going to be flying back later on tonight to get back at it. When Unifor is in, we're all in. And frankly, I'm sick and tired of how this trade deal has screwed so many of our members. There's a little inside baseball. They asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Listen, I haven't and I won't. I said that's not going to stop me. No non-disclosure agreement is going to stop me from calling out a bad deal. If a new NAFTA doesn't get us on the path that puts workers first, then I'll be guy leading the parade against it. I stop listening to anyone who tells me that free trade has been good for Canada. We sit on a $120 billion globe deficit in manufacturing. Pre-NAFTA, we had a $20 billion surplus. And people are saying it's been good for Canada. $20 billion surplus, $120 billion deficit, and that's been good for us? It's been good for the 1%. It hasn't been good for us. So here, big auto, aerospace companies are building new factories in Mexico. And at the same time, as Canada's closing plants and cutting jobs here. When companies can exploit terrible working conditions, terrible labor standards, and make incredible profits, while workers everywhere suffer, I'm not in the mood to compromise, quite frankly. You know, free trade was never, NAFTA was never about creating jobs in Canada, the United States. Free trade, the NAFTA agreement was never about increasing the standard of living for Mexican workers. Free trade was bargained to put pressure on wages in Canada and the United States. So when Brian Mulroney said that one of the spin-offs was going to be the raising of the standard of living for Mexican workers, he lied. You see, poverty in Mexico is 52%. My problem is not with my brothers and sisters from the United States. My problem is not with my brothers and sisters and working class people in Mexico. Workers don't wake up every morning and say, I enjoy living in poverty. My problem is with the Mexican government and the corporations that have been exploiting these workers for the last 23 years. Here's the type of people that we're dealing with. I went, if you could imagine, to a function the other day in Washington with the Chamber of Commerce. You have to know not a lot of them in the room really would like us much. But I was talking to Steve Verheuvel, Canada's chief negotiator. And this person walked up, introduced himself to Steve, introduced himself to myself. And he was the head of the pork industry in the United States. And he proceeded talking about what an incredible agreement free trade has been for the pork industry in the United States and the amount of pork that they're shipping to Mexico. So I said to him, as he's singing the virtues of free trade, I said, let's talk about the virtues of free trade. What do you think about the fact that in Mexico the minimum wage is 90 cents an hour? What do you think about that? Didn't say anything. I said, what do you think about the 500,000 manufacturing jobs we lost in Canada and the million or so that we've lost in the United States, directly related to NAFTA, and the carnage it's had on the jobs? What do you think of that? Said nothing. So what do you think about the fact that a worker in Mexico, if they worked in a Mexican assembly plant for 200 years, 7 days a week, can't buy the vehicle that they're building? What do you think of that? Says, well, you know, I really don't have much to say about it. He says, that's the system and I'm comfortable with it. I says, don't you get it? I said, if the workers in Mexico had a decent standard of living, then they would be able to buy more pork than you're producing. It benefits everyone. So join with the progressive movement and let's get our act together. Because as long as corporate America and corporate Canada believe that exploiting workers is the path for prosperity, then as a labor movement, we're going to continue to fight. Workers around the world are frustrated with free trade and globalization. Governments have let companies run amok. No one is calling for trade to stop. They want trade to benefit everyone. The status quo just isn't going to cut it. Traded with free trade and globalization. Governments have let companies run amok. No one is calling for trade to stop. They want trade to benefit everyone. The status quo just isn't going to cut it anymore. So look, we've laid out some pretty ambitious proposals in our submission to the NAFTA talks that turns the status quo on its head. And we've been working with our allies throughout North America, including the UAW, the UE, to forge common grounds. We need a new approach to trade, a new framework with new principles and goals. And in my recommendations, I am urging Unifor to build this framework to ensure trade policy is a tool for us to build a better world and guides us away from the destabilizing politics of Donald Trump and those like him. Look, Donald Trump has brought out the worst in people. In his first few months in office, he's taken steps to ban travelers and refugees to the United States from most Muslim nations, including Syria and Sudan. He's made it his mission to dismantle President Obama's healthcare reforms in the United States, a move that disappropriately hurts African Americans. His comments and treatment of women over the years are despicable and beyond description. In recent weeks, he's decided to ban transgender people from serving in the military. I'm not sure if I'm more horrified of these moves or of the total and complete radio silence immediately after last weekend's terror attack led by the ultra-white lunatics. Frankly, I call them Nazi scum, white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia, that left one young social justice activist, Heather Heyer, dead and many more injured. I'm going to be more blunt. Trump's a complete and total coward. Our hearts go out to the sisters and brothers in Virginia. We stand in solidarity with them in their fight against hate and racism. We showed this solidarity and vigils throughout Canada this week. Unfortunately, Trump is a symptom of a much bigger political trend, a disregard for human rights world over. Western democracies are in the grip of a wave of alt-right populism, a brand of politics that is extremist and fueled by hate. It's a throwback to the 20s. NGOs like Human Rights Watch say these political movements threaten to reverse years of progress and accomplishment. We see it in the United States, and we see it elsewhere too. In Holland, in France, the UK, Austria, and many more. And as much as we'd like to think Canada is immune to this, we're not. I still remember feeling numb After hearing the news that 6 Muslim men, 6 brothers, were shot and killed during prayer in a Quebec mosque this year. It breaks my heart to think of the families who've lost husbands, fathers, brothers, uncles in an act of hate. I get mad when I hear statistics that hate crimes against Muslims in Canada have jumped more than 250% between 2012 and 2015. Too often these stories, these statistics, they seem so distant. But then something hits close to home. In my community, I see recruitment signs for alt-right groups popping up on phone poles. I read news reports that show groups of people gathering outside a Toronto mosque not far from where I live, chanting, "Say no to Islam." This is the face of discrimination. It's the face of inequality. We can see how both can easily shift from words and threats to acts of hate and violence. In fact, there's probably no greater expression of hate than inequality, than male violence towards women. We know the stats in Canada. We recite them all the time. 1 woman killed every 6 days, and usually by their partner. We know the stats, but we need to know the stories, the people. In the past year, 3 Unifor sisters have died at the hands of their partners. Mylene La Liberty, Local 2889. Sarah Beth Forbes, Local 4600, leaves behind a young son. Sandra Fortin, Local 1937, leaves behind her teenage daughter. More than that, we've lost sisters who are part of Unifor's extended family. Angela McAdory, age 39. Daphne Huard Boudreau, age 18. We mourn for these sisters, but we continue the fight for equality. That's what we must do. Racism, hate, sexism, Islamophobia, these are all intertwined. These are all threats to true solidarity. These are barriers to building better communities and safer workplaces. Barriers to equality. Human rights are our collective responsibility. We are all allies in the struggle. If we truly want to build solidarity, if we truly want to build a better world, then protecting and advancing human rights must be our priority. I want Unifor to light the path on human rights in the workplace. In the next 12 months, I want Unifor to host a national dialogue on racism and Islamophobia. I want us to involve government stakeholders and other allies in an open and frank roundtable. I want us to talk strategy. How do we advance our work in the face of this new political dynamic? And there is so much more work on human rights that needs to be done. I want us to push for an end to Canada's discrimination against First Nation children. I want us to support legislation that gives women access to reproductive health services, including abortions without fear of intimidation. I want a Canadians with Disabilities Act implemented as quickly as possible. I want us to lead a national campaign calling on Canadian Blood Services to lift discriminatory restrictions on blood donations for men who have sex with men. I want to raise awareness on the gender wage gap in Canada and to address pay equity in our collective agreements. I want us to recommit to the fight for decent work for young people. Brothers and sisters, I'm excited about the weekend ahead. It's going to be busy. There's no doubt in my mind. But we have some incredible discussions and debate to be had. We're going to hear from some incredible speakers. Maud Barlow, Wab Kinew, and our honorary Unifor brother, Mr. Danny Glover, will be with us here again. My good friend, the Canadian the head of the Canadian Labour Congress, Hassan Youssef, who was recently re-elected to a second term. Together, we set a path that carries us forward over the next 12 months. There are some big issues at play today, and we can't shy away. See, that's what sets us apart from all others, is that what we say, what we mean, and what we do. Unifor was built to bargain tough, and in this room are some of the toughest bargainers in the world. Every day we challenge the boss. We are building a better union. But we're also built to tackle the biggest issues of the day, whether in politics, equity, human rights, or trade. And what a moment we have today. We've fought hard these past few years to create the political space to make a difference, and now we have the chance to move forward, to build a more progressive Canada, to build a better world. I think the last few years have shown us all something. It's shown us that our union can be anything we want it to be. We are charting new courses for organized labor. We're not shying away from the tough battles or the controversy. We're building a union. We're building a movement. We're making history every day, from our work on the shop floor to the work in the halls of government. And we're doing it together. Brothers and sisters, in solidarity, let's keep the fight going. A better world is possible. Let's get it done. Thank you very much.